Today, we're thrilled to have Bailey Farren with us. Bailey is an alum of UC Berkeley, where she co-founded Perimeter, a disaster management platform aimed at improving communication for first responders during emergencies. Her journey is nothing short of inspiring, from being named to Forbes 30 Under 30 to most recently being crowned Miss San Francisco 2024. Bailey's innovative work at Perimeter has received recognition from the New York Times for its role in social innovation. Today, we'll dive into her experiences as an entrepreneur, her passion for first responder technology, and her role as Miss San Francisco. Welcome, Bailey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I think we want to start off by, learning more about Perimeter, like your startup, and what that is all about. So Perimeter was born out of your experience with wildfires in NorCal, and I was just wondering, could you walk us through sort of that moment of realization that led to you, knowing that you need something to change for emergency response communication?
Absolutely. So it started with my first wildfire evacuation, which happened while I was a student at UC Berkeley. So it was in 2017, and it was called the Tubbs Fire. Now, the reason that I was in Santa Rosa and not on campus is because my mom had just had major surgery and she needed help evacuating. So I drove up to help get her out, and during that incident, I was shocked that we had literally no information about what to do or where to go. And after the fire, it was such an overwhelming experience that I wanted to ask a lot of questions. And I started by talking to my dad's fire department to understand, hey, how could we have gotten information from the public safety agencies into the hands of the public so that we can make informed decisions about what to do, where to go, how to get there, etc. But what I learned from my dad's department is that even the first responders were struggling to have that real-time information and really be on the same page about what was going on. And so I would say that moment of realization it started with the fire, but the real moment of realization happened when I was on campus and I was on the phone with a firefighter at my dad's department who basically manages technology. And I remember him saying that they were primarily relying on paper maps and radios for all of their situational intelligence during that fire. And I was literally crossing right by Bancroft, on campus still, just leaving a class. And I remember this shock while I was on the phone, and it made me realize, okay, this is something that I have to dedicate myself to. I didn't know at the time that it was going to be a company. I wouldn't know that until a year later when the campfire started. But that moment of realization was on campus when I had to realize that, wow, the technology that we have as consumers is completely different than the technology that firefighters and first responders like my parents have, even though they're the ones who are truly on the front lines of the climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so incredible that you had that realization while you were a student at Berkeley, in the same place that we are. I think that's absolutely incredible. So kind of based on that, how did you and your co-founder, Noah Wu, come together? And what was the early stages of developing a startup, getting funding here at UC Berkeley?
So we met at an SET program. It was a summer abroad in Portugal.
Was it EIA?
It was
Oh,
EIA.
I just came back from that this summer.
Oh,
and
congratulations.
It was literally the most incredible experience.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, it's the European Innovation Academy, and it's a summer program at Cal. And I had gone the year before to Italy, and my team had won, so we were in the top 10. We got to pitch. And because of that experience, I had an opportunity to go back as the TA, basically, for the next year. So I was a TA for the program, Noah was a student, he was competing, and he did a couple things during the summer that just really caught my attention from an engineering and just a sheer confidence perspective, and his team did really, really well. And after the program, when we got together as a group of EIA students just after the fact to reunite, I asked him, hey, when are you graduating? And he said, oh, well, I'm a junior this year, so next year. And I was like, rats, because I have this idea for this company, and I'm really looking for a technical co-founder. And he said, well, how about we get coffee? Maybe I'd be interested in dropping out. And I'm like, okay, he's not interested in dropping out. I'm not even going to follow up with him about this. So he follows up with me a week later, and he says, hey, aren't you going to pitch me? And I said, okay, let's get coffee. And sure enough, we meet at 1951, and at that meeting he says, okay, I'm going to drop out and we're going to do this. And I'm like, for real though? Actually, is that what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And true to his word, that that winter break is when we went all in on Perimeter. We applied to Alchemist Accelerator and we got rejected over winter break, but we really knew that we were onto something. We'd gotten so much market validation from the first responders we were interviewing, so we actually used that last semester at Cal to take a project management course together with our first employees that were, of course, our friends and fellow students. And so we started putting the program together, utilizing all these UC Berkeley relationships and resources. And a lot of our first big opportunities, like getting into Alchemist eventually that next semester, and also some of the first investments into the company were from relationships that we had as students, whether it was our instructors or people who participated in EIA. But those are really what laid the foundation for us to get off to a pretty fast start as soon as we graduated.
Wow. Yeah, no, you've spoken about how you received like over 300 rejections before getting to those like final yeses. So how did you stay motivated during that time and like throughout that hardship of building everything from the ground up?
Yeah, that was a very, very challenging, basically year and a half. Like, it was a long time. It wasn't 300 rejections in a month. I wish. But the way that it happened is, so after we graduated, or after I graduated, Noah dropped out, and the team all went full-time. We started in Alchemist Accelerator immediately. We were in the accelerator for about 6 months, and then we went to pitch demo day. It was great. It was January 2020, if you recall, and everything was moving along from the perspective of our investment conversations. But then when the lockdown happened in February, all of our fundraising conversations stopped. Basically, everybody ghosted us. And no one was investing in seed stage. They definitely weren't investing in gov tech or public safety tech. And frankly, no one has even heard of disaster tech at this point. In fact, most investors that I talked to today still haven't heard of disaster tech before. So what Perimeter is doing is really unique. But it was even more unique 5 years ago when people thought these fires were a fluke thing, that they weren't going to continue, that they weren't going to continue being a problem. And so that year and a half of pitching and getting rejected, the thing that really kept me going, honestly, was our mission and knowing that technology could solve the problem that we needed to solve, and that it was something that I would never regret giving all of my time and energy to. I thought about this when I was graduating, and I actually asked one of my colleagues who's still at Perimeter. His name is Moore. You may have met him at EIA. That's where I met him. And I remember asking him, like, hey, do you think I should go all in on this fire thing, or do you think I should work at Google? And he said, well, if you worked at Google, you'd be terribly bored in 2 weeks. And what I realized from our conversation is 5 years down the road after I graduated, if I'd gone all in and did everything in my power to start this public safety disaster tech company, then 5 years later I wouldn't regret it. But if I got a job at Google, or name your tech company of choice, and then I saw these disasters continue to happen, I saw them happen, I would continue to see them in my hometown, I'd continue to see first responders like my parents responding to these disasters with no solutions and tools and resources, not the kind that they need. And so I would know that I could have tried, I could have done something about the problem. And so when I realized that, I knew that I had to give this everything I had. And so that really kept me inspired, and frankly, I don't know how some founders do it who are starting something that they don't really, really care about. Because if I didn't really, really care about Perimeter and solving this problem, and specifically solving it for the people that we work with, I would never have been able to get through all of those rejections. But I do care so much, and I really believe that first responders are heroes that run into fires that the rest of us are running out of, and they deserve to have the best possible technology at their disposal.
That's amazing, like you invested, like, you know, this one idea that you planted it and you put all of, like, you know, your effort into it to water it and grew it into something really amazing. And so for those like students, or even, you know, just anyone who has like an idea or has a seed and is trying to decide whether to plant it or if they should, you know, put all of their water into it, then like what would you recommend or what advice would you give for people in that situation?
Well, I think it's good to run a lot of micro experiments to see if your idea is something that will actually take hold, because I definitely don't think if I was really passionate about something but no one expressed interest in actually using the solutions that we were talking about, I don't think it would have made sense for me to go all in on Perimeter. But with all of the interviews we were doing, we had so much market validation from our customer persona who said, gosh, if only we had a Waze platform, but built for emergency management, built for us. And I'd hear things like that over and over, like if only we could share information with each other as easily as we do XYZ with these apps. And so because I heard that over and over again, I was getting a lot of market proof that I was moving in the right direction. And the direction that we started was not exactly what we're doing today. We've had some small pivots with regards to exactly what the product is, exactly who we're focused on supporting. And so those little pivots are important, but you can only do that if you're running experiments and actually getting some kind of response from the market.
Super cool, yeah. So I know with my journey at EIA, I also was working on kind of a similar like tech-based AI documentation service. And so I know with a lot of tech and like knowledge-based products, there are a lot of liability issues and issues that people, don't trust it, things like that. So how have you navigated that, and how have you developed your product to kind of pivot those issues?
Well, I think there's a very, very real issue that exists in public safety, which is around the idea of paper maps. And with paper, the thing is, paper is never going to have a battery that dies when you really need it.
Exactly.
And so I think there's a lot of questions about how technology can supplement the tools, systems, and workflows that already exist, but I don't think that we actually need to get rid of all paper maps in order to also benefit from the technology that we've developed that helps people get real-time information during disasters. And so I think part of the navigation is just about understanding where non-technical solutions are having a really positive impact and how technology can be used to supplement those. But something that's also working in our favor that would have been very different if you tried to start this company 10 years ago is everyone is familiar with really easy mapping systems. So you never had to sit through a seminar in order to learn how to use Google or Apple Maps. First responders know this because they're consumers like the rest of us. And so what we are doing is we are actually building on top of all of this knowledge that they already have with regards to using digital devices, mobile devices, and having easy apps that are map-based in many cases. So I think 10 years ago when apps and the familiarity with all these geospatial tools, when that was pretty new, I think Perimeter would have been a big lift. But years later, since people do have that familiarity, I think it's a lot easier to bridge that gap.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think you're so passionate when you speak about your company, and I think you're so passionate about everything that you do. And I think you wear a lot of hats, CEO, public speaker, Miss San Francisco. So for busy people like you, how do you balance everything, and what are some tricks or tips that you have for us if we too want to, balance a lot of things?
Well, I feel like I'm always learning new strategies for getting as much done as possible, but something that has really shifted the way that I think about the work that I do and how to do not just more work, but I'd say the most high impact work is actually looking at how I can remove things from my calendar. And so when I was a student, I was so focused on cramming every single minute of the day with another thing that needed to be done. And frankly, when you're a student, I do think that is an excellent way to operate. But if you're full-time on your startup, or you're full-time working on a project that requires a lot of decision-making and creativity and innovation on your part, I think it's really important to give yourself space to make sure you're working on the actual priorities. So there's this book called The One Thing, and The One Thing basically poses this question that says, which one thing, if you accomplished it, would make everything else on your to-do list easier or unnecessary? And what I love about that book, and I reread it like every year because I forget, and I pile my schedule full of things. But what I love about that question is it reminds you that most of the results that you create come from a really small number of the tasks that you have. And so my focus is always trying to figure out, okay, where am I getting the most results from my time and energy spent and resources spent? And where can I double down or triple down on those things and let some of the other things go? And so I think it's really a matter of of clearing your schedule for the things that really matter, as opposed to what I did at the beginning of my journey, which was just cram everything into as many time blocks as possible.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, like what has like the most like net positive benefit rather than, you know, trying to do like a million different things at once.
Totally.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Like, do you have any other advice for like the lessons sort of that you've learned along the way in your last, you know, 4 or 5 years?
Absolutely. Well, I share this basically every chance I get, and I really focus on sharing it with female founders because I think it's a message that we uniquely need, and it's about self-care. And I had this amazing executive coach named Danny, and he taught me years ago when I asked him for a book that I should read, thinking like I want a business strategy book, like, you know, give me something that I can really chew on. And he recommended this book about self-care. I was like, this is the lamest book recommendation ever. Like, I don't need self-care. I need
Where's Startups 101?
Exactly. Like, I need more. Like, give me something to really chew on. And what I loved about this book recommendation, long story short, it took me a while to actually read it because I thought it was not going to be helpful. But when I eventually did read it, what it shifted for me was this understanding that if I want to run my startup like a marathon, and my co-founder always says it's a marathon of sprints. It's not a sprint or a marathon, it's both put together the entire time. And if I want to run that marathon, not just for 2 years, but if I'm thinking about what the 20-year vision of this company looks like or beyond that, then I need to make sure that my body is actually capable of running that marathon, which means fueling myself effectively, getting enough sleep, making sure that I'm taking care of like my basic physiological needs, which might seem obvious unless you're an overachiever like a Berkeley student and you are saying, I don't need the sleep, I don't need regular meals, we cut everything out. We're like, well, I'm just gonna focus on what really matters and I can do it with coffee. So coffee it is.
My coffee's right over there.
I know, I saw it. And I mean, gosh, as a student, it's just, I could never have given up coffee as a student. Like, I'm definitely not making that suggestion, but it is interesting that once you move from being in primary student mode to primary founder mode, we have to start looking at, and even before, I mean, ideally, but especially once we have to really decide the direction of a company and we have other people's livelihoods to think about as well, it's so important to make sure that we are fit to show up in a way that is energized and grounded for as many of those high impact conversations, meetings, and opportunities as possible, because they're just going to keep flying at you and you got to make sure that you can play ball, and it's really hard to do that when you haven't slept.
Yes. Yeah, that's really great advice, and I think that's definitely part of the reason why you've achieved so much at a young age. But what's one thing that you still want to achieve maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, or what's like a goal that you have?
Yeah, well, Shree already knows this, but I'm really excited to write and share more about the journey, not just the highlight reels. Something that drives me nuts about the founder experience is you see when we're on Forbes 30 Under 30 or when we're in the New York Times, but you don't see 99% of what it actually looks like.
Yeah.
And I think that for anyone who thinks getting into a startup or starting a company will be like this chill experience where occasionally you end up on Forbes 30 Under 30, like, that is not what it is. Like, it's very, very, very challenging.
I'm sure.
But I love the idea of being able to share some of those more like real and honest experiences, because when I was 22 and I was starting this company, I didn't feel like I had female mentors who knew what I'd gone through or who knew what I would be going through and could give me guidance. And I tried, and I really like went to conferences and I tried to build these relationships, but it can be challenging to find women who have experienced what you've gone through before, and I feel like I have a lot of battle scars and a lot of things that I'd love to share with someone so they don't have to make the same mistakes that I made.
Yeah.
And I think also just be someone who you can feel like, oh, she, like, I get it, she gets me, someone's done this before, someone's experienced all of this, like, anxiety before, and here's a way out. So I think in many ways I'm writing for like my younger self and for other 22-year-old female founders who are looking for guidance and hopefully looking for something that's also a little bit funny and mostly very real and doesn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like there's always, like, when you're in, like, sort of that younger, like, stage of life where you're going through all those things and figuring everything out that you want to do, you know, with your career, like, with your personal development, feels like there's a wall between, like, this group of people and the people who figured it out and, like, made it. And it's like,
Totally.
do I have to figure it out all by myself to get to that point? Like, no. Because, you know, there's people who are, you know, there and, like, willing to share that support and that mentorship. So having those connections and, like, those relationships are, like, so important. And I feel like it saves so much time to, you know, not having to go through it yourself.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why Shruti Goli and I are so passionate about the Start Something podcast and building this community for both female founders but also aspiring female founders. Is we don't want that wall to exist. We want you to feel like there's a group chat of like all your sisters, your older sisters, some of your younger sisters, like people who have gone through just a couple of years above you or a couple years ahead of you who have, you know, been there, done that, who you can go to for advice and say like, hey, I'm going into this situation, someone said this to me, how do I respond? How do I draw this boundary? You know, how do I pitch this person? There's all these questions that come up, and I love the idea of having a community, especially in the Bay Area, where 2% of venture capital is going to female founders. Like, we should know each other.
Exactly.
So I'm really excited about investing in that community and continuing to do so with her.
That's awesome. Yeah, at BWIB we're all about female empowerment, and I think it's definitely a big issue in the startup space, especially with VC. Female founders just not being taken seriously, and I think it's definitely a struggle to overcome that. But I think the best support definitely comes from other women, so that's really great to hear. So you've received recognition not just from investors, but also from organizations like Verizon for climate resilience and the New York Times with the Good Tech Award. That's a lot of awards. How do you envision Perimeter playing a role in addressing climate change and disaster preparedness on a larger scale?
So I like to think of it through this metaphor of the 911 system. Today, if you needed medical attention right now, you would know exactly which number to call.
Exactly.
But if a climate-related disaster happened or any kind of emergency happened, and you need information about what to do, you wouldn't know where to go. You'd go to Google, you'd start typing in UC Berkeley, emergency, fill in the blank, and you'd hope that relevant results would show up. Maybe some people, you go to Twitter, you go to social media, you start looking around, but you don't have an easy system like the 911 system that makes it possible for you to receive emergency information. And so that is what Perimeter has created. And so we are that system that makes it incredibly easy for public safety agencies to communicate map-based, accessible information to people like us who need to know what's happening, what's happening on campus, what's happening with this natural disaster, what's happening with this event that I need to respond to. And so by being that one-stop shop or that platform that makes it really easy for these public safety agencies to get information to you, we believe we can accomplish that mission.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, like your background includes like growing up in a family of first responders. So how did that influence not only affect like your approach to creating Perimeter, but also your perspective on leadership and responsibility within these high pressure environments? Like how do you feel like you've prepared, to be able to help these people who, are helpless in these times of need?
Absolutely. Well, something that I love about first responders is there is so much servant leadership in public safety. And, it's easy to use my parents as examples, but first responders and people who work in public safety, they are the people who will literally run into a burning building to save the life of a stranger. And so something that I appreciate so much, having grown up in in a family of first responders, is that I got to see that environment my entire life. And my family has this joke that we knew what situational awareness meant by the time we were like 2 or 3 years old, which is true. We did know that term. I remember my mom in a grocery store, if someone was, if one of her 5 little kids were a little, scattered or doing something, she'd say, hey, could you have some situational awareness? And I remember knowing exactly what that meant as a kid. And so it is a little bit hysterical that 20 years later, I am running a situational awareness company. And so I think the best part about coming from a family of first responders is both the amount of like deep admiration and respect that I have for people who dedicate their lives to public safety. And of course, I get to spend so much time with these people, which is amazing. But also, because I grew up in that family, I speak their language. And something that I think a lot of first responders appreciate about me is I'm not afraid of them. And I think that it's a very insider-outsider community, and so they might push on you a little bit to see if you can handle yourself in a room. And if they push on me, like, I can push back. And so they know, like, oh, you definitely have a firefighter dad.
Yeah.
And so I'm really grateful that I was raised in that environment, because I feel like I can really show up as a partner to these agencies, as opposed to someone who's trying to convince emergency managers that a tool like Perimeters would be impactful.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, I really love that, you were able to build up like that confidence, throughout like your childhood, and just be able to prepare like so naturally, even, without knowing that you were getting ready for like
No
taking
idea.
on
No idea.
this endeavor. And so you've spoken a lot about like the importance of mindset in entrepreneurship. So what strategies do you use to overcome that self-doubt, and how do you maintain confidence in both your personal and professional endeavors?
Well, I think overcoming self-doubt is a daily routine. It has to be a daily practice, because I think sometimes there's this idea that once you accomplish something, the self-doubt kind of goes away. It's like, oh, once I get that recognition, or once we've achieved this as a business or this, then I will not have the self-doubt anymore. And the truth is, I think people experience self-doubt every single day, and the way to overcome that self-doubt is by taking control of the story that we tell ourselves. And it's easy to let the world take control of the story. But I think the big challenge is we don't notice sometimes when the world has taken over our story versus when it's coming from us. And so we might have that voice in our head that, maybe it's someone we knew from high school that's saying, who do you think you are? Like, why do you think you can achieve this? And so that story might be in our head, and we might not even notice it.
Yeah.
But if we have practices like journaling, where you remind yourself of the story you actually want to be true, that we are capable, that we are qualified, that what matters is that we're interested in the people that we're talking to, as opposed to feeling like we have to be interesting all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think if we figure out what our values are, then it's really a matter of just coming back to those values every day. It's almost like having whether it's a mantra, or, did you ever have to read some kind of manifesto in college? I feel like I had to read a bunch of manifestos for some reason. And I don't have a written out manifesto, but I do feel like I have some values that are really important to me every day. And I want to come back to them as often as possible, because that is how we not only control the story, but we stay in the game. Because if one of those 300 investors who said that Perimeter was impossible, that I was going to destroy my reputation, that we'd never be able to raise any money, we'd never be able to figure out how to sell to government, if I believed any of those things and not taken control of the story that says, this is obviously possible, look at the technology that exists, there's obviously a need here, I've experienced it firsthand, and the first responders are asking for this tool, so I believe we'll figure out a way to get it to them. If I didn't take ownership of that, and I let all those investors convince me that this was impossible just because they have PhDs and $1 billion, then Perimeter wouldn't exist today. And we wouldn't have been able to help the millions of people that we've been able to reach. And so owning that story, I think, might be one of the, if not the single most impactful practice that we can develop, whether that's through meditation and mindfulness or through journaling, but finding some way to constantly tell ourselves a story about what's possible and not what's impossible, I think is really critical to not just staying in the game, but having a really joyful experience, and an experience that you can look back on and feel really proud of and really grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was so inspiring, and I think we both definitely learned a lot from all of your insights. I think that wraps up all the questions that we had, but do you have any parting words or anything else you want to say?
Well, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I want to turn it back to you. You're both very high achievers, and so I'm curious, from your perspective, what is one habit that you have that you think helps you to achieve the goals that you've already achieved? Because you've already achieved a lot. So what are one habit from you and one habit from you that you think makes a really big difference in your life?
Sure, yeah, I can go first. I think what you said about mindfulness and taking time for yourself, I think I definitely practice that a lot. I'm a part-time yoga instructor, and so I think that has definitely helped me take control of my really busy schedule. I try to schedule some time in for not just that, but also for my other hobbies every single day. I think I'm someone who's very creative person, and I think my schoolwork and in my academic life, I don't have a lot of opportunities to express that creativity and express the hobbies that I used to love to do. And so I think especially recently, I've been trying to, even if it is scheduling in more time, to take time for myself and take time to do things that I love. So
I love that.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I totally feel that way, like, having that outlet, like, whether, you know, you love yoga, you love, you know, swimming or whatever it is, sort of, like, making time for those habits, and, like, that just really, you know, uplifts your, like, mindset rather than, you know, sometimes when I'm stressed, I have the urge to just lock myself in a room for a week and not leave until I get all my work done. It's not the best, you know, I feel like I'm, like, you know, missing so much, my mood goes down, just, like, it's not worth it. And so I think for me, like, I'm someone who really, like, gains, like, the energy of the people that I'm surrounded with. So surrounding myself with people who are positive and uplifting and are able to, you know, like, bring me up, and also just have, like, that ability to share, like, that positive energy back to them, so everyone can, you know, feel like they're in a community, they're not alone, and everyone's, you know, working together to be, like, whoever they want to be and go out and achieve their goals. But, you know, that's not it's not necessary to do that all by yourself. If, you know, you're locked in your room for a week, it's really hard to, you know, have, like, that motivation to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's one more thing that, as you were sharing, felt like a really important thing to share, which you probably have already figured out, but we consume so much media today. And if we are locked in our room and we are occasionally, whether it's watching Netflix or listening to podcasts or doom scrolling social media, like, even if we're locked in our room, there's a chance that we're going to be exposed to a lot of media, like, without leaving the house. And so I think one really critical skill is learning how to, like, and by learning, we know how to do this, but learning to actually prioritize moving away from media that doesn't make you feel inspired. And that's hard, because there's a lot of very uninspiring media out there, and it's in your face 24/7.
Yes.
And so either finding ways to limit some of the negative media, and there's a lot of that, it's not just the news, like social media, the things that we watch on Netflix, etc., but also finding time, if we do want to watch something, to look at something that is inspiring, to read something or listening to something that is inspiring, to follow inspiring people on social media, because those messages are just absolutely swimming and you know, mixing with our own thoughts and shaping our stories. So finding people that we can look up to and admire, and using that media time to leave with, like, a positive spin on the life that we're living, I think is incredibly impactful.
Yeah, and, like, we always as humans, like, are very susceptible to comparing ourselves, and with social media, like, when you're feeling bad about yourself and, you know, you see a startup founder's highlight reel, or, like, you know, you see, you know, like, everyone's accomplishments, like, on LinkedIn, while, you know, you're feeling like crap. You know, that's not, like, the best way to sort of motivate yourself in that mindset. Like, you know, going out and talking to people and hearing, you know, shared struggles and, like, motivation to, you know, be lifted up and lift everyone else up is so valuable.
Absolutely. I think Audible has saved me, because I listen to so many inspiring books.
Yeah.
If I go 2 days without listening to a book, like, I start to go downhill.
Like, really
my mindset, I'm like, oh man, I'm really struggling right now.
Yeah.
As soon as I, like, start listening to those books again, or if you have a really inspiring friend, or you're at a point in your journey where you can hire a coach, like, those things have such a big impact, and they remind you that actually just the fact that we can be here and have this conversation and be considering startups and you know, being at a school like Berkeley is such a huge privilege.
Thank you so much, Bailey, for talking with us and for sharing your amazing insights. I think everything was incredibly inspiring and very, very important for us as women and as business students to understand. And I think we'll definitely take away everything that you said. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Absolutely. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Catalyst Conversations.
Bye.